Boeing and the 737 MAX by Group Blue. Boeing was founded just 13 years after the Wright brothers first flew at Kitty Hawk. The company started with making seaplanes out of a boathouse in Seattle, Washington. Boeing's biggest customer, at least during the first two world wars, was the government, which provided a substantial boost to the organization. During the 1970s, the industry suffered a recession, and as a result, Boeing saw its lowest point. During this time, the company had to operate in unknown territory and produced wind turbines and also entered the housing industry. However, this was not the first time the company resorted to such measures. After the First World War, when government orders came to a standstill, the company had to produce items such as furniture and wooden boats. Today, Boeing is the largest aerospace company and a major producer of commercial airlines.
Today, their services and products include commercial and military aircraft, satellites, weapons, electronic and defense systems, launch systems, advanced information and communication systems, performance-based logistics and training.
The problem that Boeing is currently facing is associated with their new 737 MAX aircraft. The 737 series has always been the organization's best-selling, but recently issues have arisen. There have been two fatal crashes, both involving the new 737 MAX. The crashes were with Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines. The FAA had issued a grounding order for the 737 MAX, and many other countries did the same. Both crashes occurred within minutes of takeoff. Investigations into the crashes have concluded that there are two factors associated with the crashes. The first is a faulty sensor. The sensor controls the plane's anti-stall feature. The sensor malfunctions and engages the feature which causes the plane to lose altitude and crash. The second factor is due to lack of pilot familiarity with the plane's new system.
Boeing is facing a lot of different problems due to the initial crashes. The FAA has issued grounding orders of 737 MAX, which we will unpack later. They have a 6-month safety ban, regulatory challenges, so that way they could get those 737s fixed and back up in the air. And also their finger pointing at crews and other aspects have backfired tremendously on them. The U.S. Justice Department currently has a criminal investigation against Boeing. Also, the Department of Transportation is currently auditing their practices. There is also direct financial problems for Boeing due to this. Lawsuits from families of victims. They also have a $100 million family relief fund that they've already paid out half of. Not to mention more PR costs involved. There's also repair costs to take into consideration. Labor for staff that actually has to fly out and also repair the planes themselves. Parts, logistics. There's a whole team dedicated just to that. Also, the fact that a lot of these systems are interrelated, so in order to fix an issue over here, you also have to fix another issue over in another system over there. And they've already lost a multi-million-dollar sale due to this, not to mention the cost of legal aid that they're having pair up with their PR department quite closely as well. Then there's also the social aspect of the crashes. The public trust is broken in Boeing. Investor relations are also strained. Not to mention employee morale is going to be affected in multiple aspects due to these crashes. Client relations are also strained with Boeing right now. Most of their fleet is already grounded due to the safety concerns. Also, they're prolonging the grounding themselves to be on the safe side. Grounded planes also are more susceptible to weather damage, and with flights canceled, that also means lost revenue for the airlines themselves, which can be tacked to Boeing's fault. So some of the airlines have already canceled plane orders to Boeing, which in turn means less revenue for Boeing as well. And some in the industry are thinking that this may follow the footsteps of the DC-10.
Root causes. We can identify 5 root causes that led to the Boeing 737 MAX disaster. The first is leadership's change of emphasis away from product and towards financial mechanisms. The lean integration of Six Sigma concepts. Cultural acceptance of low quality stemming from labor issues. Deregulatory pushes from inside the company, and a disincentive for having training for pilots. And finally, outsourcing and underfunding design while also using a tiered supply chain system. So, getting into the specifics of these root causes, the first one is that leadership change of emphasis away from the product, that product being airplanes. So, the executives were disengaged from that business starting in the late 90s into the early 2000s and continuing to today, including relocating their operations away from their production facilities. And in general, the executives at the head of the company are not interested in necessarily building airplanes and more focused purely on creating shareholder value. And the way that they're doing that is by focusing on stock buybacks to create stock price increase. And the idea there is that by creating scarcity, it creates value for the folks that continue to hold stock. And they're doing this rather than looking at the products that they're actually producing. Then looking at the quality management systems that exist within Boeing. So according to Boeing's own description of their quality management controls, they use what they call a lean system, a lean integration of Six Sigma. And it's more inspired by Six Sigma rather than really adhering to the pure system of Six Sigma. And they focus more on a value stream rather than quality. So they're looking at where they're pulling value out of the production process rather than creating quality at the source, at every step of that process. There's also a general cultural acceptance of low quality, which stems from labor issues that the company has had over the years. So they have actually a history of substandard production that's gone back several decades now, including leaving pieces of equipment inside the aircraft after they're sold, which can clearly cause accidents and issues. And they've been cited many times by the FAA for various safety concerns, as well as have had some issues with the military with the products that they've sold to them in terms of the quality that's been produced. They also have a significant issue with labor relations, and some of that's going to tie to what we're going to talk about later in terms of outsourcing. But Boeing has, again, over several decades had labor issues with both its staff when it comes to the engineering side of the house as well as the production side of the house. And they have a history of suppressing whistleblower concerns that are raising issues when it comes to quality. So instead of encouraging employees to speak up when they have quality concern issues, instead they are silencing those employees. So outsourcing and underfunding of design and the tiered supply chain. So this was alluded to earlier with the kind of labor issues that Boeing has had over the years. But what they've done is basically taken a Toyota-style approach. Toyota had essentially outsourced 70% of production. But the way Toyota did it is they did it with a ton of controls, with building really deep relationships with the supply chain to make sure that the the products that they were producing were made from quality outsourced pieces. Boeing, on the other hand, did not create these same systems and relationships, and that is part of what's led to the quality issues that they've had. They also significantly budgeted less dollars to the development of the 737 MAX than they had for any previous development of any previous plane, especially compared to the 787, and as well as other models that they had previously designed. So they removed funding from the design aspect of producing this new plane. And the tiered supply chain, ties to the outsourcing piece, but also ties to the design aspects. So part of what defunding the design for the 737 did is that meant that they had to rely on outsourcing even the design of the airplane, which is really the primary function of Boeing's business model in theory, but they outsourced a large portion of that, including key aspects, to third parties. And the tiered supply chain, so they're outsourcing, but they're kind of double outsourcing. So the way that they built their supply chain is they built stronger relationships with first tier and weaker relationships with second tier suppliers, so that they were having essentially suppliers that were organizing suppliers and putting together the pieces at several different levels before they reach Boeing. Now, on the one hand, you get a lot of coming back to the term before, you get a lot more value out of that structure, but the way that they're getting value is by not creating the relationships with the suppliers, and therefore not having a good handle on what kind of quality management each step in the supply chain has. And what they've found is that, as opposed to their earlier models of planes, the 787 and subsequently the 737 MAX had significant issues with the quality of the different parts for the planes that were produced by this tiered supply chain that they had created. Okay, so recommendations. So tailoring these recommendations to the root causes. So number one, and this is really a key, although probably one of the most difficult aspects of recommendations, to replace largely, and also to reorganize the executive committee to include a chief quality and safety officer. And that way you ensure that buy-in from the leadership level for quality management. I think it's also important to make sure that the members of the executive committee who are not interested in building airplanes are really no longer members of that committee. While you do want to place a lot of emphasis on shareholder value, especially in an industry where safety is such a large concern, it's irresponsible to have executives who are not interested in safety in the production of those airplanes. A full integration of Six Sigma or another total quality management approach would be another recommendation. The idea there is to remove that lean aspect that they currently have in their approach to quality management. It's kind of a need for all or nothing, really, because that lean approach has clearly led to some significant quality issues. Creating a quality feedback reporting system is also important. You want to reduce that labor friction, so reduce the conflict between the engineers and the management. Create a safety net for whistleblowers. Make sure that they feel comfortable reporting potential safety issues as well as general quality issues as well. And I think it will address those quality concerns from the start. You want to have quality begin at that frontline level, and if there's not a vertical communication method for employees, you're not going to see that happen. And the final recommendations, you want to end the agreements with customers that include training penalties, like the one with Southwest. Frankly, it's an irresponsible agreement to make to begin with. It's kind of a bet that you won't need to do training, and when training is such a key aspect of safety, it's pretty irresponsible to have that as part of a deal, as well as a commitment to ending deregulation lobbying. This is kind of a big change, and it's one that would, again, align with a significant shift in corporate culture. Rather than trying to seek to cut corners and avoid regulations, understanding that regulations are there for a reason, there for safety, to make sure, again, that there are not internal incentives or external disincentives from doing the right thing when it comes to quality and safety of the aircraft. Moving design back in-house, that is something that, again, would mean a major shift in funding, but it's kind of getting back to the basics of what the organization should have already been about in the business of designing and building airplanes. It also allows for full quality control of the design process, which is really that core function which failed in the 737 MAX. And finally, retire that tiered supplier approach. The supply chain had significant quality issues, and that was because of this tiered supply chain. And you want instead to build firmer, direct relationships, and obviously this takes more time, more investment on the part of Boeing, but it should result in higher quality products, higher quality things coming from the suppliers, and a deeper understanding of their individual quality management approaches.
In order for Boeing to survive the crisis at hand, they will have to have a laser focus on both quality of products and conduct. They have already started the reorganization process on October 11th of this year. Muhlenberg was stripped of his chairman role and is currently left with his role as CEO. In the same announcement, they also wrote that they will be naming a new director with expertise and experience in safety. Furthermore, they need to conform completely to the Six Sigma model that they kind of use their shadow of rather than adhering to fully. Further, they need to create a work environment that is making employees feel safe, complete with protections for whistleblowers. They also need to promote their clients into learning their systems well rather than downplaying and lobbying against the need to do so. Boeing also needs to bring their designing back to in-house to ensure safety needs are being met or exceeded. They also need to rid themselves of the tiered supplier approach and establish strong bonds with their suppliers. They also need to continue pairing the PR and legal teams together. Boeing is currently in the wake of the two crashes in an extremely complex and tricky situation. Many lives were lost, which has also resulted in their reputation being destroyed. They also have many financial bleeds, both outgoing and less incoming. Logistics and different aspects of the repairs that are needed to make the 737 MAX flyable again is an extreme taxing situation on multiple teams within their departments.